You guys are going to have to be patient with me. I'm still learning how to use the pen and type and stuff like that. Our first lecture is going to be on systems. So we are taking IB, Environmental Systems and Societies. So we've briefly touched on the societies part. So that's one framework we're looking at when we're looking at what are people's value systems, what do they believe, and how does it change their decisions. We've also looked at things like the history of environmental science. Why did we have Earth Day in the 60s? And you can think about, well, that's the first time television came around. All right, so that was the first time people really saw these environmental disasters in their living room and didn't have to go out of their way to get information. So we talked about that. The other part of how we're going to study environmental science is through systems. The reason we do that is we have studied things like soil, we've studied pH, we've studied plants, and we do that all in separate classes. So you could take, a geology class and study rocks. You can take a biology class and study living things. But the idea for us is we're going to use a system to put that all together and be able to understand how do they work together. And that's the whole idea behind a system. If you were to beg me to define it, it is kind of an assemblage of parts that says assemblage. So we have different pieces, different parts. I like to think of a bicycle, all right? We have a wheel, we have a pedal, we have all the gears that go in it. It's not just the parts, it's how their relationship between each other. So it's assemblage of parts, their relationship, and their function as a whole. All right, so a non-living example I already brought up. So you can study a bicycle. Right? If you take it apart, it's just a piece of parts. But once you put it together, you're able to get a new function that you wouldn't have if you were to study them in the pieces alone. You can think of your phone as one. You can even think of the value systems that we talked about a few classes ago. So it's the idea of, if this is you, there's things that go in to determine your values, all right? So things like religion, media, and then you can also think of, well, what do you output using your value system? So the decisions you make. So things like using bottled water. I totally forgot a T here. So using bottled water, or needing a new iPhone, or any kind of day-to-day decisions you make, that's kind of your output. We're really going to be looking at living systems. So there are several examples of living systems. The first, of course, is, an ecosystem, right? It's in the name. But you could go as small as a drop of water. There are living things in there. You have your abiotic factors like pH and water and light going in. You could have algae in a drop of water. So there's lots of things you can study and talk about how does that drop of water in the middle of the ocean act as a system. And then maybe you can kind of look and get bigger as how does the ocean itself act like a system. Things like coral reefs. You can talk about a tree, a forest. All of these are things we could put into our systems model of how are things working together to serve a function. Systems kind of brings up this theory, and we'll hopefully get to talk about it more in class. It's the Gaia model. And the idea is if you think of the world as a living thing, so the ocean is an organ. So it's the idea of the whole world is a living model. So things like when we mess with temperature, it's like when you guys have a fever. You need some time to get over your sickness and get better. For the whole world, that's going to take a lot longer. We'll talk more about this in class, just kind of the idea of we have to take care of it when it's sick. Are we making it sicker? by our lifestyle and our value systems, which we talked about earlier, and what can we do to make it better. For our cases, I like biomes, so that's things like you have your coral reefs, you have your forests, and it kind of puts it all, it's easier to study, all right? So we have boundaries around what's in it. And then we have our whole biosphere. Our biosphere is things like the atmosphere that works, and that's air. The atmosphere has to work with the lithosphere, which is rocks. Oops. Which has to work with our ecosphere, which is us and kind of living things. And then finally, it also has to work with our hydrosphere, which is our water. So we have our air, rocks, we have our living things and our water, and those are all parts of our system that work together. When we're drawing systems and kind of using them as a model on paper, there are pieces I would like you guys to keep. It's kind of like a key, I guess. So when you have things in boxes, this means you're storing. All right, and this could be matter. So if we're talking about carbon dioxide or oxygen, and it could also be energy. So things like sunlight going into trees. And matter and energy have flows. So every time you something moves from one storage to another, it's going to flow. If you have a storage, you're going to have things go in. That's our inputs. And you're going to have things go out. Those are our outputs. Oops. And typically you want to label what's happening. So you want to have kind of processes labeled. So those processes are going to show the transfer or transformation of energy or matter. So again, our processes are going to show transformation, sorry guys, that's my bad. Transformation or transfer. We'll be talking about matter and energy in this class. So we'll talk about things like sunlight and entropy and our laws of thermodynamics. But for right now, when we have arrows, things are either being transformed, transferred, etc. There are 3 different types of systems, and that's what I'm going to be putting up in our next video. So right now we have covered topic 1.1.1, and if you actually go back and you look at using a system for something that's non-living, even things like your own personal value system, that's topic 1.1.2, and I'll briefly talk about that, and we'll do a little more with it in class.